Hello, today I want to talk about displeasure. How are you experiencing displeasure in your body? For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Cordelia Gaffar. I'm the ultimate joy goddess and the CEO of Cordelia Gaffar Enterprises. I help women of faith to consider pleasure as a possibility, resulting in you being multi-orgasmic. And in order to do that, it begins with being aware of how you are experiencing your body in its natural state. And I hesitate, you saw me hesitate there, I hesitate to call that your natural state. We often experience stress and burnout, and that's what I'm calling displeasure. So that is actually not your natural state. We were built to only experience joy and bliss. And but the benefit of experiencing displeasure, or as we like to call it, stress and burnout, is that it gives us an opportunity to connect the dots between our mind, our body, our spirit / emotions. Yes, your spirit is your emotions are the bridge between your spiritual self and your physical self. But I'll get back to all that later. So I want to begin with a quote from Dr. Christaine Northrup. She's actually a prolific author, and she is also an actual medical doctor who has written extensively about exactly this. And so in her book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, she actually says, and I'm going to read this so you'll see me looking away from the camera. This is part of the section specific to the genital tract, okay? Any perception of invasion in one's emotional life can result in increased permeability of one's immune system boundary, both on the surface areas of the body and internally. So what that drills down to, right? She goes and talks about the various conditions that are related to various emotional states or sustained emotional states. For this conversation that we're having, I'm calling that displeasure. So, for example, if you're often experiencing anger, right? You're often pissed off at work. You're feeling like you're being diminished or dismissed, and you have lots of anger in your body's way of releasing that, right? That because the boundary that has, the boundary that has been crossed here is your emotions, right? You've been diminished. You've been set aside. And that results in sacred rage. But in order for the sacredness of the rage to emerge, you must first release the rage. And so the release of that rage shows up as a UTI, which is a urinary tract infection. So if you're someone who often gets urinary tract infections, perhaps connect the dots between your experiences of anger or prolonged anger, okay? Additionally, I've written extensively and spoken about the effects of racism. Institutionalized racism is the most prolific form of narcissism in the world, okay? And when you experience this, you have lots of anxiety and irritation. And those things show up differently, right? So this is where we get into the itises. You'll have rheumatoid arthritis. You'll have cystitis. You'll have just various forms of episodic conditions. It's so funny how timing works, right? So the body is self-healing. So maybe for most of your life, you may have escaped having episodic UTIs or yeast infections or things like that, because anxiety will show up in the form of a yeast infection in your genitalia. But all of a sudden, when you reach around 40, 45, 50, it's happening in regular intervals. And we call this perimenopause. And the truth is, when you ignore the body for decades and don't address your issues, your displeasure on the mental and the emotional level, and you're also suppressing and diminishing those things, your body takes control. All alarm systems are on go, and you may experience systems shutting down. In the most extreme cases, women who come out of domestic abuse or narcissistic abuse situations, it doesn't necessarily have to be like in their marriage or in a romantic situation. It could be at work. Maybe you have a really controlling manager, right? And if you are a Black woman or a woman of color, but I would say more so for Black women, because we are the ones who really get the brunt of all the things. You have systemic racism, right? So your baseline is narcissistic abuse, So the best thing for you to heal would to be loving and kind to yourself, which is why for the past 9 years, I've been talking about creating sustainable practices of self-nurturing. Because when you create sustainable practices of self-nurturing, then your body doesn't go into crazy mode 4 or 5 decades into your life. And so here's a caveat, right? I shared recently in a post story about my life. When of course, I was mitigating to the best of my ability my situation. But once my situation ended, there is the woosah. The body's like, we're no longer in this baseline of survival mode. Let we just relax and release all the things. And as, just like anyone who's ever lost weight or, released weight, you'll notice as you lose the weight, you start having these emotional things come up. I call it emotional residue. So it's the same thing with any kind of extremely abusive situation or toxic situation ending. You will then experience perhaps a multitude. In my case, I had cyst in my breast. I had joint pain. My knees actually ballooned up, and I almost thought I was going to have to wear crutches. I went one day dancing with a friend of mine, and I fell after dancing because my body could not handle the amount of endorphins that I was allowing myself to release through dancing, right? And that's actually one of the practices that I heavily encourage. And I've created my own form of dance, which is part of my new consolidated system that I'll be rolling out shortly in some days. So I want you to be in the habit of paying attention to your body and understanding that it is critical for your life, for your health, to create sustainable practices where pleasure is a possibility. Until we meet again, be free.